What is up, ladies and gentle nerds? It's your boy Graham, also known as HamHawks42 on the internet, and today we are looking at another random magic card. And this particular one, well, let's take a look at it, shall we? The card that we're looking at is called Pit Scorpion. It is a 1/1 for 3, which is it's 2 in a black, and its creature type is Scorpion. And here's the original text on it. So this was originally printed back in Legends. This is a classic card. It's I don't know. It's interesting, and I'll explain why. So it's 1/1 for 3. Not a great rate. So what do you get for that? If Scorpion damages opponent gets a poison counter. If opponent ever has 10 or more poison counters, opponent loses game. Now, I want to point out the lack of articles throughout the course of those sentences. It's interesting. Sounds very robotic. The Oracle text on it is, whenever Pit Scorpion deals damage to a player, that player gets a poison counter. So it's nice and smooth, what we would expect. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wait a minute. It's a Pit, so it's a Scorpion that has Infect? And no, it does not have Infect. That's actually not what this is. It deals poison counters. And yes, poison counters were around back in Legends. So poison counters is an incredibly old mechanic. It actually did not show up with New Phyrexia like it's easy to assume given the way that newer cards have kind of used poison counters. And Infect is actually a marriage of two different mechanics. There's poison counters, which are counters placed on players, and then there's the -1/-1 counters. If I'm not mistaken, that ability was initially called Wither, where they dealt damage to other creatures as -1/-1 counters. That was its own mechanic as well, and those two combined to give us Infect. So the idea is they're more powerful when dealing damage to living things, is kind of the idea, I suppose. Well, it's poison, and it -1/-1 weakens. So yeah, so you get that poisonous infection kind of feel. But Pit Scorpion is actually one of the OG poison counter creatures, which is really cool. Now, when poison counters first showed up, the game was designed to be entirely one-on-one, 20 life total. Heck, Ante was still a thing, if I'm not mistaken, at that point. And it was like poison counters were just a way of, it added another element to the game, another level that you kind of had to keep in mind. And since then, we've seen poison counters make a comeback with Infect in New Phyrexia, and we've also seen other alternate life totals with, we have Mill, obviously, which Mill's been around for a long time, but like really powerful, viable Mill is something that we have now, which is really cool. And, well, we're constantly flirting with. It's out there. We're going to figure it out. Fellow Jankomancers, we will figure Mill out. It's viable. But in that situation, the total points that you're kind of going up against to try to win the game is the number of cards they have in their library. It has nothing to do with their life total, which is why I mentioned it here. Then we also have things like commander damage. So if you're playing in commander, your goal is to hit one of your opponents for 21 damage with your commander. And if you're, and so that is one way to knock somebody out of a game. And then again, it has nothing to do, like, that total is completely independent of the life total. In that case, it happens to be dealing damage as well. Just like how with the poison counters, with Infect creatures, if I'm not mistaken, the poison counters are in addition to standard damage. Now, with this Pit Scorpion, oh no, now with the Pit Scorpion, it is combat damage as well. So you still do hit the life total, but you also have these poison counters. Also, I want to point out, back in Legends, there was no such thing as Proliferate. At least I don't believe so. That came in later. And so that element of it, being able to multiply the counters on players, is something that showed up later. So those Atraxa Infect decks that we all know and shake our fists at, unless we're the ones playing them, in which case we just smile evilly as we just watch our friends slowly rot away. That got weird. Anyway, but so this is to say that poison counters have been around for a long time. Poison counters have been a part of the game for a very long time, which is really cool. And I love it when Wizards of the Coast is developing a new mechanic and they look into the past. And with New Phyrexia, actually, it was even more, it was even better, because they were looking into the past with their villains too. So if you're not familiar, the lore in New Phyrexia was Phyrexian oil actually infected the plane of Mirrodin and took it over. And so New Phyrexia, Scars of Mirrodin, those sets were all about Mirrodin being corrupted by Phyrexia. And the Phyrexians were like the original bad guys from, the original kind of mysterious evil boogie creatures from back in the time. Back in the time, yeah, let's call that an expression nowadays. So from back in the time, they were this evil nightmarish force that the good guys were going up against all the time. That was just, they were the bad guys. And so for them to show up after taking years off, narratively speaking, and not really being a part of the story, to all of a sudden being the main focus and the main villain, very cool. And then for Infect to look back into Magic's past and find these older mechanics in Wither and poison counters and pull those forward as well, it does justice to the game's history in a way that I believe we should celebrate. And so I really appreciate that. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And when we take a look at something like Pit Scorpion, we can see we can see the start, the beginnings of what we now know as Infect, which I know for Commander players everywhere, Infect is kind of a thorn in people's sides. And let's think about that for a second. I think part of the reason why Infect is hated so much is because it is separate from the life total. So if you're not familiar, the idea of 10 poison counters equals death, period, regardless of how much life you gain. And as somebody who has played a life gain deck against an Infect deck, it's a rough way to go. It's a tough beat, because your strategy is completely negated, just totally nullified. It doesn't frickin' matter what you're doing. It doesn't matter how much life you're gaining. Those poison counters are hitting you. They're sticking. They're not going anywhere. And yeah, it's not pleasant. So, but at the same time, the one challenge that I've heard Mark Rosewater level against changing the number of poison counters in Commander. So that's one thing. There's been a debate going on of how many poison counters should it take to kill somebody in a game of Commander, because the life total in Commander is raised from 20 to 40. So why isn't the poison counter requirement raised from 10 to 20? Like, why not? And really, at the end of the day, it comes down to Commander's kind of a busted format, and if you're hanging out with people who are playing Infect and you don't like Infect, well, tell them to stop playing Infect. Is really what it comes down to. But the other detail that Mark Rosewater actually mentioned on his Drive to Work podcast a number of months ago now that I really respect, and I think he's onto something, is aggro strategies in Commander don't really work because you have so much life and so many targets that you need to go up against. And so Infect actually allows for a fast aggro strategy where you can target one player and knock their life total down much, much faster by that life total being 10 instead of 40. So as long as you're hitting with Infect creatures, which I thought was an interesting challenge, or an interesting comment. And now that I'm thinking about that, I can see that go both ways. One, it opens up a viable strategy within the format that isn't viable otherwise. All right, I feel like there's something to that, and there's a lot to be said for that. And that has a place. But the flip side of that is, do we want aggro strategies in Commander? Who am I to say that they're all bad? But at the same time, I think of Commander as a place for my cards to kind of breathe and for me to pull out those big, silly spells and big, silly combinations that I can't do in any other format. And so do I want somebody just like blitz killing me like in the first 20 minutes of a game? The first 20 minutes of a 2-hour game? No, that would be really miserable, actually. And it kind of goes against the spirit of the game. But at the same time, if everybody is playing really fast aggro strategies, if everybody's playing a fast deck, whether that's a fast aggro deck or a fast combo deck, if we understand that this game of Commander is going to be a sprint, then that actually could be interesting, and then the dynamics of the game change dramatically, and then it's a question of who do we target. And so somebody might be running Infect, somebody else might be running like really fast low to the ground mono red, somebody else might be running like another monocolor aggro, like a white weenie strategy or something like that. And then if people are running those types of strategies and people are really swinging like right out of the gate, that could get really interesting. And that could be a fun strategy. And that could be a fun environment if that's the kind of Magic you like to play. And there's nothing wrong with that. And Infect would fit at those tables perfectly. So if that's your playgroup, if that's your style, oh man, in your Infect deck, take a look at Pit Scorpion. Go ahead and throw that in there just to get a little bit of old flavor, assuming you have access to black, which I would imagine you would, but you never know. Yeah, it's fun. Like these older cards there, and here's another thing: if you're building an Infect deck, if you are looking for cards to put into an Infect deck, Pit Scorpion is a great example of a card that can work with Infect strategies. It is compatible, but it has Infect nowhere on the card. That word does not appear here. So if you are looking through the Gatherer, you're looking through Scryfall, or you're looking for, through some other search engine, trying to find cards to add just because you're curious and you want to see what's out there, do a search for Poison Counter. So that's a little tip. Look for poison, like do a search for poison, not just Infect, because there are a lot of cards out there that have access to poison counters that have nothing to do with Infect. And for the most part, because the keyword Infect has caught on so hard as just what we associate poison counters with, these cards have gotten kind of left by the wayside. They've been more or less forgotten, and Pit Scorpion is one example. So don't forget about these older poison cards. They're out there. They're here for you, and they will still work in your Infect decks. So you can make your friends mad in EDH. Excellent. Thank you so much for hanging out. I appreciate you. You can catch me on Twitch, twitch.tv/hamhawks42, and you can catch this podcast anywhere fine podcasts are sold, as well as YouTube with video. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for hanging out. Don't forget, you are a good person, and you deserve to be happy.